Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at some what I believe are misconceptions, and one of these came up on Patreon where someone made a comment, and it just occurred to me that despite so much time passing, despite so much information, some people in certain areas, certainly of the Watts case, have different perceptions to what I think really happened. And one of them deals with this question: did Shan'ann try to turn Watts against his parents? And of course, that is something that Cindy said, Shanann's mother-in-law, that was going on. And because people generally don't seem to like Cindy, that's a malicious statement against Shan'ann, so it can't be true. What I've found in true crime, in so many areas of it, is when you have a polarity where you kind of have a situation of it's either this or that, and people are at loggerheads, people are sort of fighting tooth and nail. No, it's either this or that. Often it's a combination of the two. Often it's not black or white. Often it's not this or that. It's something kind of in between. Does this apply to this question? And that's what we're going to discuss in this episode. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So I know that this is quite an emotional issue. I know that certain people have sort of nailed their flags to a particular post, and it's likely to rile certain people up. What I want to ask you to do is give me a chance to make my case. So try not to comment or interject sort of right in the beginning. I'm going to make a case in sort of 2 or 3 different areas, and you'll see where I'm going to and the whole approach that I'm taking once you've just listened for a while. Okay, is that fair? So I know there are a lot of people, when I make videos like this, they want a simple answer. So if the question is, did Shan'ann try to turn Watts against her parents? They want to know, yes, she did, or no, she didn't. And I think a quick and simple way of answering it is, no, she didn't, right? But I don't think that is the simple answer. I think there are examples of Shan'ann doing that, turning him against his parents. Certainly that was how he experienced it. And in terms of true crime, that's the kind of psychology we're interested in. We're interested in what he thought, what the criminal thought, or we should be, right? So if you want a simple answer, the answer could be no. You could say that Shan'ann invited his family to the wedding and they chose not to come pitch up, or you could say yes. You could say that she was turning Watts against his parents. So, right, you could play it both ways, essentially. But this video is really about the middle ground, which shows something else, which shows that there was a certain thing going on, I guess, a certain feelings going on between Chris Watts' parents and Shan'ann. So it was coming from the parents as well. And then there was also feedback. There was also feedback from Shan'ann. And I think one of the simplest ways to almost introduce this whole topic is to talk about Nutgate on July 9th, where Shan'ann said she needed to vent to people who understand. And I'm not going to go through all of that. I think a lot of you are familiar with it. But instead of just sort of glossing over it and just mentioning it without actually referring to the specifics of it, I think if you don't refer to the actual language that Shan'ann uses, her actual words, a lot of the stuff in the phone data review, I don't think you get a sense of being not only in her shoes, but being in the shoes of the situation. So on July 9th, Shan'ann said, my 2.5, who was actually just less than 3 years old, is severely anaphylactic to most all tree nuts, and we are visiting in-laws. I specifically said we can't have them in the house when we stay. My mother-in-law stated we don't buy them. I specifically mentioned the ones she's deathly anaphylactic to as well. I arrived, and on the floor shelf of the center island was a bag of pistachios, big bad one. I removed immediately. Today she lets her other granddaughter eat an ice cream that has all tree nuts in front of and next to my 2.5-year-old child that can't have them. I said I didn't appreciate it and removed my daughter. Her response was that she has to learn she can't always get what she wants. I'm beyond furious, and she's telling me I'm overreacting when my child's life is at risk. Now, I'm not going to go into the merits of Nutgate here. What I am going to just mention is that wasn't Shan'ann, if you want to use that language of turning someone against someone, wasn't Shan'ann trying to get people on her side on this particular topic and basically against her mother-in-law? And so when you go through the whole Nutgate narrative on Facebook, you see the people reacting and saying, that's not right. You must tell your husband to set her straight and all that kind of thing. And so you could ask the question, or you could say, wasn't Shan'ann trying to turn people against her mother-in-law on Facebook? Now, you might want to frame it in a different way. You might want to say, wasn't Shan'ann just upset about Nutgate, or wasn't Shan'ann just trying to get other people to understand? But effectively, she was trying to get kind of reinforcement and, yes, get someone on her side, right? And you might say, no, Shan'ann didn't do anything wrong. But from Cindy's perspective, and I think anybody's perspective, if you did something to upset another person and they went and vented on Facebook about you, wouldn't you think that would be something like turning people against you? Wouldn't that be what it felt like? And would you respond in any way? How would you respond? I think most people would probably block a person like that. I think we've all experienced people going on social media and you see the sort of appearance of them trying to turn other people against you. I've certainly experienced it a lot as a creator. I've seen it on Reddit. I've seen it on YouTube. I've seen it all over the place. I've seen it in book reviews. And it's a real thing. You could call it cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, but it is a real thing where, in fact, just on the radio yesterday, I heard them saying, why do you want to vent your personal marital problems or relationship problems on social media? Keep it clean. And the disc jockeys were joking about it, but it is quite an interesting question. Why would you want to do that? Why would you? And the guy was sort of making a joke that you, in the middle of an argument, maybe both of you kind of disconnect and update people on social media what the other person's saying, and then get back into the argument and all that kind of thing. And you might think it's a joke or it's funny, but it does happen. People do feel like they sort of celebrities in their own little celebrity bubble, and they've got their social media to be concerned about, and some are more concerned about appearances than others. But I think if you ask the question, did Shan'ann try to turn Watts against his parents, and you look at this social media aspect, I think you can see why it's not necessarily a simple answer. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will be having that victim blaming thing dinging in their mind. And, if I think about the director of the Netflix movie, American Murder, The Family Next Door, that director in particular would think, wow, this guy is really going after Shan'ann. It's so unfair. Shan'ann's the victim here. Yes, she is. Shan'ann didn't ask to be killed. Yes, she didn't. And all of that is obvious, very obvious, something that's absolutely implicit in all true crime. We're here to find out what happened and to some extent why it happened, what the dynamics were. We're not saying that, God forbid, a murderer was right to do what he did. We're not saying that at all. We're saying, what is the murderer thinking? What were the circumstances that are being kind of hidden from us? What is really going on? And so if you So we've looked at the question from the perspective of social media, but there's also the aspect of the children, that the children were to some extent turned against their own father. I'm not saying Shan'ann said to the children, your father's whatever and this and that. I'm not saying that she purposefully tried to turn the children against their father, but he certainly had that perception as well. He had the perception that they were repeating insults. I think one of them was that she would tell him to shut up or something like that, and then they would repeat that. And I think one of the ways that disrespect manifested was them throwing chicken nuggets at him, which he kind of made a joke of, but I don't think he necessarily liked that. We know that he told his mistress that was something that really, really hurt him. That was kind of like a line that was crossed when they started doing things. And I think if he felt, and you could say, as a parent, you've got to suck it up. I know as a dog owner, sometimes your dog does things that just seem unforgivable. You've got to kind of suck it up. I've just come back from a long trip, and I was expecting my dog to be a lot happier to see me. He was happy, but it kind of hurts you a little bit when you don't get that sort of feedback that you want. And I think my dog was very happy while I was away. He was playing with other dogs. He was in a big garden. I paid people to take him for walks, so I think he had a fantastic time. When he saw me, he was happy, but I think he was also already happy, if I can put it that way. And it wasn't as though he was alone at home for the entire time. I think if that had been the case, he would have been extraordinarily happy to see me, but anyone would have been, right? So, one's got to see it in that perspective, but you can kind of understand a feeling in certain scenarios of being stung that, wow, I've given so much to you, I've loved you, I've whatever, and didn't you notice me not being there? And remember, Chris Watts was in Colorado for 5 weeks, and when he came back, his children didn't seem to need him or really care about him because they'd kind of gravitated to their mother. And then there was also the thing with Nutgate that had made the children, I guess, feel like they didn't want to be with his parents. We don't know those dynamics precisely because they're not really mentioned, but we do know that Bella was afraid that Cece was going to die in her sleep. We know that. And that came from Nutgate, right? So I don't mean to be mean to say, Shan'ann turned his children against Chris Watts, that she turned the children against their father. But there definitely was a sense that was happening from his perspective. Do you see that? Now, I don't think you can accurately talk about the Watts case if you're not using the phone data review and if you're not extensively using their own words, quoting from Shanann's text to Chris Watts and quoting from his text to her. In other words, you really want to get the unfiltered Shan'ann and you want to get the unfiltered Chris Watts, and you get that when they are communicating with each other, and that is what makes the phone data review so valuable. And that's why I spent so much time last year doing the 2 years ago today Chris Watts series, going through the entire phone data review. You really want to get a sense of them through them, and we obviously not going to go through the whole phone data review now, but you get a very good sense of what we're talking about in this particular area about turning someone against someone else, where they're actually talking about it. And you get that from, I think it's page 19 of the phone data review, but it's discovery page 2099. Now, bear in mind, the discovery only has 1,960 pages, so it just shows you how many pages are redacted. Also, if you compare the discovery of the Chris Watts case to the Letitia Stork case, which is 26,000 pages, it just gives you a sense of how much there could have been, how much information could have been found and investigated on. In any event, we pick up the narrative on August 4th, 2018, and it's the same day that Kessinger was searching for wedding dresses for 2 hours. So at 3:36 in the morning, Shan'ann sent a really long message to Chris Watts. And this is all about really arguing about his parents, arguing about his relationship with them, their relationship with her. And you can't get it better than this in their own words. So this is what Shan'ann says. She says, truth came out last night. I didn't create no dagger between you and your dad. That was done by your mom and dad, and I won't change a thing. Now, Shan'ann saying I didn't create a dagger, you could say, is ample defense, that she didn't do it on purpose or something like that. And maybe that is some explanation, but she would later not understand why Chris Watts was acting strange. So she could tell that Chris Watts didn't seem to want to be in the marriage. He didn't seem to want their third child, and she just couldn't understand it. But then she kind of at the same time said, I didn't create a dagger, and I'm not going to change anything. And if you jump from there to the letter that she wrote on August 9th, just 5 days later, she was going to change the thing. She was going to, in her words, act civil to them, which sort of suggests that she wasn't acting very nicely, politely, or whatever, to them. So there was an acknowledgement of that, and we'll get to the letter in a moment. But what she's saying here is in response to him saying to her, you created a dagger between me and my father. Now, I don't really care whose side you are on, and it doesn't really matter whose side I'm on. In fact, I'm trying not to be on anyone's side. What matters is what was kind of actually going on. And what was going on was when they were at Myrtle Beach, Chris Watts was, now in North Carolina. He'd flown all the way from Colorado. His parents were also in North Carolina, but he couldn't see them. Now, I'm not quite sure how you can reconcile his parents are at the beach and he's at the beach, but he's not allowed to see them, with the fact that she's saying she didn't create a dagger. I think, as I understand it, it was based on Shan'ann not wanting, I don't know if it's to punish them or to punish him or whatever, but or maybe she just didn't want any drama. But it was because of Shan'ann that the entire family didn't come kind of together. You could argue that it was because of her in-laws that the drama started in the first place, but they still wanted to see their grandchildren. They still wanted to see Chris Watts, and he only saw his family on the last day. So who was really calling the shots? Who was really controlling who was seeing who? Who was trying to turn someone against someone else, right? And so what Shan'ann then does is she does quite a long text, quite a long message about how important Cece's life was, and she said something about, you better believe I wanted to say a whole lot more than I did. And so I think it's just clear that Shan'ann she is herself turned against his parents, both of them, right? She says, I was being the bigger person and protecting Bella. She says, I didn't tell your dad not to come to the party. I didn't tell him not to text or call your daughter on her birthday. I didn't tell him to start acting like he has only 2 grandkids instead of 4. So I get the sense that she feels a bit like Chris Watts' sister and her children were getting the lion's share of affection from the grandparents, and I think she felt shut out to some extent. And her response then was to shut them out, something like that. She says, I didn't block your family on Facebook, he did. Everything she's saying may be true, but I think the flip side of the story is, why did they block her? Well, because of what she said on Facebook about them. If she says, I didn't tell him not to text, well, couldn't it be because of how they'd spoken to one another? And then she says on page 2100, myself and your kids have nothing to say to them. They do. They owe your kids their life. Your parents' home isn't a safe zone. Your mom isn't safe. Now, all of this rings quite hollow. I mean, it may be true, but it rings quite hollow when we think that ultimately the Watts home wasn't safe. Ultimately, the most unsafe place was 2825 Saratoga Trail. Ultimately, that is where all of them lost their lives, right? she says, you can tell them what you want, but I didn't tell anyone to stop loving your kids or stop acting like it. He did that, not me. So you do get a sense that Shan'ann's definitely got her hooks in it for Ronnie Watts, and we know that when Ronnie came to the police station, he wasted kind of no time blaming Shan'ann, showing the police when he was in the interrogation room the image of the doll, remember, and saying that the kids would never have done this and Shan'ann did it. I think he also used other words to describe her as bipolar and other things. But there's obviously no love lost between Ronnie and Shan'ann, and also Cindy and Shan'ann. I don't think, and we're going to get to that in a second, how they felt about her. I don't think it's just that Shan'ann didn't like them. I don't think that was the end of the story. To go back to her message, she says, you can believe I created this dagger, but I didn't do that. I stood up for our kids. I advocated and protected our children. Now, you can see that any way you want to. You could say that Shan'ann didn't do anything wrong. She was just protecting her children. And that's fair enough. But I think you could also say, how was she protecting the children? Like going onto Facebook and ranting about her in-laws isn't really protecting her children, right? Saying that is advocating, well, that's arguable. You could take it any way. I think the other thing to consider, which to me is just common sense, is there are many images where you see Cindy Watts and Ronnie Watts playing with the children, having dinner with the children, spending time with the children. They also babysat the children on numerous occasions. Is it really a case that their lives are in danger from their grandparents? I don't think so. Was it really a case that the grandparents were evil or trying to hurt the children? I don't think so. Was it the case that they were undermining Shan'ann? Possibly. Was it a sense that Shan'ann felt undermined by them? Very definitely. I think she did feel undermined. But was she being undermined? Were they trying to undermine her? That's perhaps a different story. That depends on where you come into it. She talks about, these kids are my world and I have to protect them from the evil of the world. I shouldn't have to protect them from evil families. So she's calling her in-laws evil, right? Do you think they were? I mean, do you think they were trying to kill the children or whatever? I don't think so. I think it's dangerous using those words evil, because evil is always a matter of a point of view. It's a very long message, this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but she talks about there's nothing wrong with me. You and your dad are no different if you're okay with her behavior. So obviously Ronnie was defending Cindy, and seems like Chris Watts was doing the same. And she talks about a gold medal using an expletive. And I had a lot of choice words I wanted to say to her and your dad for his stupidity. So there's no love lost between her and her in-laws. So she's turned against them. And but bear in mind, she's in North Carolina. She's at their home, wanting them to babysit her children while she's working. And she's not liking the way that they're doing it. And bear in mind that they're not just babysitting her children, they're babysitting someone else's children. Jamie's, and that can get quite tricky. It can get quite tricky when you want to give one child ice cream but the other one's not allowed to have. And you had exactly the same thing happening at the Lindstrom's birthday party, where the children weren't allowed to eat cake and all the other children could eat cake. And if you apply that, what is happening at Nutgate, to that birthday party, none of those children should have had any cake, or someone should have gone to a lot of effort and gotten something for the Watts children so that they could have their own kind of cake and eat it while the other children were eating it. And that should have been Chris Watts' job, and he didn't do that. So it's kind of I think it's just a difference of opinion, and it's two personalities that were absolutely clashing in terms of Cindy and Shan'ann. And I've said this all along, is I don't think Nutgate upset Shan'ann as much as Cindy saying the words, she needs to learn she can't get what she wants. I mean, that is total anathema to the whole Thrive thing, which is you can have whatever you want. You can go on any holiday you want. You can have any lifestyle you want. You can have any house you want. You can have any car you want. And it turns out that you can't, especially when you're in a lot of debt. And then, do you see what I'm getting at? And so, in a way, Cindy's advice was somewhat sound, I would say, just in that respect. Shan'ann goes on to say, no one stands up to your mom and your dad for that. He's just as guilty by not doing anything. I have nothing to do with him stop sharing memories of his grandkids. What does that have to do with me? And so it goes on. She says, I'm not going to worry about family. I will just remove it. Those are her words. I'm not going to worry about family. I will just remove it. And isn't that what Chris Watts did? Literally. She goes on to say, I don't control what you do. If you want to hang out with your parents today, by all means do. So they were arguing about whether he could go and see his parents. He wanted to take the children, but she didn't want them to go along, right? We know about all of this. Now, if you consider that Shan'ann didn't let him take his children to his parents, and you ask the question again, did Shan'ann try and turn Watts against his family? And at 12 minutes to 8 on Discovery page 2101, this was on the same day, the 4th, Watts said, I'm not used to not having a relationship with my dad. So he's in North Carolina and is not seeing his father, and he's trying to keep the peace with Shan'ann. And he says, I'm not used to not having a relationship with my dad. And then he says, I should have just called him before it got to this point where it got in my head. I didn't, and that's my fault. And that's the other side of the equation. That's the other side is, you might say, so perhaps Shan'ann did turn him against his parents, or tried to turn him against his parents through Nutgate, but also prior to that, after the wedding and all that kind of thing. You could say that, but the other side of the story was Chris Watts' relationship with his own family. I also want to mention that you have Chris Watts, Shan'ann very much at loggerheads with his parents, bickering with them, fighting with them, complaining about them on Facebook. And then you compare Chris Watts' relationship with her parents. They loved him. They had quite a lot of good words to say about him. Even after he'd committed these horrible crimes, they didn't want the case to even go to trial. And they kind of just wanted they wanted God to forgive him or something like that. So you kind of got a sense that he got along well with her parents and they got along well with him, but Shan'ann didn't get on very well with his parents. You don't really hear too much about how her parents and his parents got along between one another. You don't really hear much about that. But he goes on to say, I should have called them before it got to this point. This was during Nutgate. And that's where the whole pendulum of blame, I guess, swings totally onto his side. Is Nutgate's going on. She's fighting with his parents. His daughter's life's apparently in danger. And he doesn't really get involved. Why? Because he's having an affair with Kissinger. He's already turned against his own family. That's not just, I don't mean necessarily his parents that he's turned against them, but he's actually turned against his own family. He has cashed in his chips. He's withdrawn his investment in terms of his emotions and his heart and his mind, and is putting it all into Kissinger. And in that sense, Shan'ann didn't need to turn him against anyone. He had turned against his family by having this affair. I think you've also got to ask, why did he have the affair in the first place? And that is, I think, quite a uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people. People tend to say, you're wrong to have an affair, but affairs are happening all the time. Why do people have affairs? Because they're probably not happy. Somebody else makes them happier. Why? Chris Watts' answer to that was that Kissinger allowed him to be himself. And you can imagine if you're in a situation where someone disapproves of your parents, can you be yourself? Can you see your parents when you want to? Can you phone them when you want to? Can they phone you when you want to? And it was such that even the very last time Ronnie wanted to talk to the children, Chris Watts didn't think it was a good idea. And I think that expresses it probably the best, is the sense of they were at that point so turned against one another that Watts felt he didn't think it was a good idea for even his own, even though he had the power to allow it, he didn't think it was a good idea that his own parents FaceTimed with his children because of Shan'ann's ability to sort of control the outcome. And this kind of thing is totally missing from the Netflix documentary. In fact, most of the phone data review, I feel, is missing from the Netflix documentary. The love letter, of course, is there, and the love letter makes Shan'ann look very makes her look as though she's not bending over backwards, but doing everything she possibly can to save the marriage. But that was at the very last moment. What about what came before that? And an example of that is, again, in this very long diatribe between them on page 2101, where Shan'ann says, why should you beg them to be in their life? Sorry, why should you beg them, your parents, to be in your children's life? And in a way, she's almost saying, leave them. We can be a kind of a family without them, kind of thing. And she talks about blaming and dagger and swears and talking about having the balls to stand up, and it's quite sort of hectic information. She talks quite a lot about, I won't forgive you or them for that. I'm tired of it. I'm the one that takes care of you, not them. You're making me feel like SHIT these last couple of weeks. I won't change my ways when it comes to our kids. It's not really that. She doesn't need to change how she doesn't need to change the fact that she wants to take care of her children. I think she just needs to change. She needed to change how she would deal with other people. And, for example, ranting on social media. Even this should have been a conversation between them, not texting. I mean, it is quite ridiculous to think that they're both in North Carolina, they're both there, and yet they're not talking to each other, they're texting. And it just doesn't really make any sense, does it? And it just shows the extent to which they were giving one another the silent treatment. I think a lot of couples know this. You have an argument, and then you go your separate ways, or you go into a different room, and then the texting begins with one another. And that's why that whole thing about, you vent on social media instead of communicating properly one-on-one. It's just so easy to go that social media route, isn't it? So I've spent about half an hour dealing with Shan'ann's side of things. I think it's only fair to say the in-laws didn't really like Shan'ann either. I think they had their misgivings about Shan'ann from the beginning. Cindy wasn't crazy about Shan'ann, and they just didn't get along. And when things went awry, they were quite quick to, if there was an argument, I think it worked both ways. They would try to hurt one another on both sides. So the Wattses not going to a wedding may have hurt Shan'ann, or you could say that Shan'ann told them they can't go to the wedding. Well, they got Shan'ann back by not going to Cece's birthday party. So you kind of had the same thing going both ways, tit for tat kind of thing. But I think it's fair to say that by the end, not long before the murders, they really didn't like Shan'ann. And as I say, Ronnie talking about the doll to the police shows that it was easy for him to believe what Chris Watts was saying, was that Shan'ann killed the children, because Shan'ann was someone who could lose her temper. And I think what may have gone through Chris Watts's mind was, did Watts want his parents to think that she killed them because of the affair? So meaning that his parents, when he went to visit them without the children on the 6th, I think they were aware then that he was having an affair. Now, if he told a story that he had a conversation with Shan'ann, and the next thing Shan'ann killed the children, the police might not need to know about the affair because the police would probably figure it out. But if his parents thought that Shan'ann knew about the affair, I don't think that it wouldn't be hard for them to guess that Shan'ann killed the children. And in that sense, he was turning his parents against her. Does that make sense? In other words, he wanted them to believe that Shan'ann had killed the children because she'd found out about the affair. And that is essentially what he said when he kind of confessed in front of Ronnie. I said earlier that Watts did all the turning himself against his own family by having the affair, and that basically, turned him against his own family, which is exactly what Shan'ann was trying to stop. She's trying to protect her family, while the affair was actually the real problem. It's unfortunate that she was kind of distracted by Nutgate, because the real issue was the affair and to some extent their finances. So to conclude, and this I think is so important, if Shan'ann and his parents had had a great relationship, just think about it from this perspective. If Shan'ann and Ronnie and Cindy actually had a really, really good relationship, he wouldn't have felt he had a license to do what he did. So the fact that they had such a bad relationship, if Shan'ann disappeared, would they really miss her? Would they really want to know where she was? Would they really care? Right? On the other hand, if they really, really liked Shan'ann and she disappeared, they would wonder what is going on and, find her, kind of thing. And they certainly wouldn't approve of him doing anything. And I do think that I think this is such a crucial point, because their relationship was so bad, he felt he sort of had a license to do what he did, or he felt that he could get away with what he did. I think he would have been a lot less confident of getting away with it if they had a great relationship. Imagine if they loved Shan'ann. And I think quite a good comparison to this is Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson's parents also didn't approve of Lacey. Their son was their golden boy, and they didn't really like Lacey. I think they thought she was below him or something like that. But he was their golden boy, and they didn't really like Lacey. And so Scott Peterson probably figured, if Lacey disappeared, would they really care? Would his parents really care? It's the same kind of psychology. So I'm going to conclude by going to Shanann's note. And I don't think the Netflix documentary tried very hard to put this note in context. You need to look at this note in context to the phone data review and what she said there. And she talks about, you said you would call them and handle it. From there, the strain grew stronger and stronger. The only time I have seen you this closed off was after our wedding. You were so hurt and angry. You were done with them, right? So some of the turning against them was not from Shanann's side. It was just between Chris Watts and his own parents. But we obviously see that by the end, he wanted his father at the police station. He wanted a good relationship, at least with his father. And we've heard him talking to them from prison. You can tell that they do have quite a good relationship now. We also heard them talking at the sentencing hearing. But she goes on to say, when we found out we were pregnant, I wanted to help you fix the hurt and pain. So you kind of get the sense that at that time, she wanted to help Watts get back to his parents. So there she was possibly turning him back towards his parents. She says, I knew it hurt you. We worked together to help you through it. I didn't want to lose you ever. I will suck it up and be civil with your family because I love you. But there has to be the same respect on the other end. that is what's right. So what she's kind of saying here is, I will suck it up. The feelings of bitterness and holding grudges, I'm going to put it aside. But she didn't realize that it was too late. Certainly from Chris Watts' perspective at this point, it was too late. So I think it is a very, very valid question. Did Shan'ann try to turn Watts against his parents? I think she did. I think some of it is that. I think some of it is also trying to get him onto her side, which is normal, which is something that all good husbands and wives need to do. They need to be there for one another, and then, to some extent, suck it up in terms of their various in-laws. I think that's just quite common in marriages. I do sometimes think, Nicole Kessinger probably wondered herself, why did this happen? Aside from the fact that I was a major factor in the equation, and aside from the fact that they had serious financial issues, why did this happen? And I think part of the answer to that question, why on earth did this happen? Why did it need to happen? Was because of the very poor relationship between Shan'ann and her in-laws. Because Chris Watts thought that if Shan'ann disappeared, quote unquote disappeared, and the children disappeared, that he could get away with it, because his parents would just assume that that is what happened, that Shan'ann just a few weeks earlier hadn't let them see their grandchildren and had kind of made it a permanent thing. They're never going to see them again. That made Chris think, for his own purposes, well, I can blame it on her and then do what I want to do so I can be with Nicole Kessinger. Does that make sense? So I'm not going to take it further than that. I'm still going to do the John Fernie analysis in the John Benet Ramsey case. Right now on Patreon, I'm narrating the book Neverest on the 96 Everest disaster. It's one of the most popular books that I've written. And then also the Doubt narrative on the Madeleine McCann case. I'm narrating both those books at the moment. I'm also doing several series on Patreon. I'm not going to talk too much about that now, but what I will say is this Sunday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be handing the mic over to a patron who's given a really interesting theory, her name's Stephanie, her theory on the Chris Watts case and what happened. And so I'm going to be going through that with you guys on Sunday. So stay tuned for that. I think it's really interesting to see. She's obviously taken some inspiration from me and from reading The Discovery, but she's also provided some of her own unique perspective. So it'll be interesting to think what you think of what Stephanie's come up with in terms of her theory of the Chris Watts case. Thank you for listening. It's good to be back with you guys. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.